By the time the firefighters arrived, the Johnson house was already gone. Smoke curled into the night sky, glowing red and orange like a dying sun. Neighbors stood on their lawns, barefoot, in shock. Whispers filled the air, words like accident, tragedy, God help them. But behind those whispers lay something darker. Because this fire didn't start in the kitchen. It didn't start from a faulty wire or a candle left burning. This fire started in the heart. In secrets no one wanted to tell. In pain no one dared to face. This is the story of the Johnson. A family that looked perfect to the world, but was slowly burning from the inside out. To everyone else, the Johnsons were what people called goals. Mark Johnson, a disciplined, well-spoken financial advisor. Cynthia, a compassionate nurse known for her kindness at the hospital. Their kids, Marcus and Tina, were polite, talented, and bright. They lived in a neighborhood where lawns were trimmed, cars shined, and smiles hid quiet struggles. Every Sunday, the family dressed in matching colors for church. Every Christmas, they hosted the biggest dinner on Maple Street. Mark and Cynthia were admired, a power couple. But admiration is a fragile thing. Behind their bright smiles were silent wars no one saw. Cynthia was tired. Years of long shifts, unpaid bills, and emotional distance had hollowed her heart. Mark's success came at a cost, the cost of presence, affection, and empathy. Every marriage has cracks. But theirs was starting to split. It started one ordinary afternoon. Cynthia's phone buzzed between patient rounds. The name on the screen froze her heart. David. It had been nearly 20 years since she'd seen that name. David. Her college sweetheart. The man she once thought she'd marry. He had left abruptly, chasing his career overseas. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. And now, out of nowhere, his message said, "Hey, been a long time. How have you been?" At first, she ignored it. Then came another. And another. Soon she replied. And the small spark that had died long ago began to flicker again. They started talking every day. Old memories resurfaced. The laughter, the dreams, the wild plans they'd once shared. David made her feel alive again, something she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was harmless. But in truth, every message pulled her further from her husband, and closer to the edge of something dangerous. Mark noticed the change. At first, he couldn't explain it. Cynthia smiled less. She avoided his eyes. Her phone never left her hand. He tried to make things better, bought flowers, planned date nights, but she always had an excuse. Work, fatigue, the kids. The truth was, Cynthia had checked out long before. Her heart was elsewhere. And when a woman's heart leaves home, her body just follows routine. Mark started to drown in suspicion. He stayed up late, staring at her social media, reading meaning into every post, every like, every change in tone. The man who once controlled everything began to unravel. He started drinking more, coming home later, avoiding eye contact with his own children. The family dinners that were once filled with laughter became silent. The air grew heavy, thick with things no one said. Even little Tiana, only 10, could feel something was wrong. She stopped asking questions. Because in that house, questions were dangerous. Marcus was 16. Smart, sensitive, and deeply observant. He'd always looked up to his parents, especially his mother. One afternoon, while doing homework on her tablet, a message appeared. He wasn't trying to pry, but his eyes caught the words. "I miss you too." He froze. Then scrolled. And what he saw shattered the image of the family he thought he knew. Photos. Memories. Plans. Messages full of longing and guilt. He shut the tablet. His heart raced. That night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he looked at his mother across the breakfast table, the same woman who always said, "Marcus, honesty is everything." He wanted to confront her. But he didn't. He just sat there, watching the woman he loved slowly disappear into someone he didn't recognize. And from that day, Marcus changed. He grew quiet, cold, distant like his father. The family was now 4 people living under one roof, each trapped in their own silence. Mark found out by accident. A late-night vibration on the phone. A message that lit up the darkness. He read it once, twice, 3 times. By the end, his hands were shaking. He sat there, staring into the void, replaying every conversation, every lie, every "I love you" that now felt fake. He didn't yell, didn't break anything, didn't even wake her. He just walked out to his car, sat there in silence, and drank. Mark was a proud man. Pride had built his world. But that same pride now demanded something back. Retribution. After that night, Mark stopped sleeping. He moved like a ghost in his own home. Cynthia could feel it. The air between them thickened into quiet hatred. She planned to leave. To take the kids and disappear. She packed in secret, hid money, and booked a bus. But sometimes, fate doesn't wait for your plans. It was a Friday night. Rain fell in soft sheets across the quiet street. Cynthia loaded the last bag into the car. Tiana was already in the back seat, asleep. Marcus stood at the door, hesitant, confused. The clock read 11:42 p.m. As the car engine started, she looked up at the window. Mark was there, watching. Expressionless. The seconds stretched. Her heart pounded. And then, everything blurred. There was a sound. A spark, a flash. A blast of heat and light. The house erupted in flames. Wood cracked, windows burst. And the night filled with screams. Cynthia pulled her children from the car and ran. The fire grew fast, too fast. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was all gone. Mark didn't make it out. At least, that's what everyone was told. The official report said it was an accident. A gas leak. But Marcus never believed that. He remembered his father's stare. The emptiness in his voice. The silence before the storm. For years, Cynthia carried the weight of guilt and suspicion. She moved to another city, started over. But no matter how far she went, the past followed her. Marcus grew into a quiet young man. He studied psychology, trying to understand human pain. Maybe to understand his parents. Maybe to understand himself. But inside, he was still that 16-year-old boy watching his world burn. They said Mark Johnson died in the fire. They buried a closed casket, wept over ashes, and tried to move on. But the truth has a strange way of surviving. 15 years later, Marcus found his father's watch. The same one that should have melted in the flames. Except, it hadn't. It was perfectly intact. And the date engraved on the back was a year after the fire. That's when he knew. His father didn't die that night. He walked away. Marcus had lived with ghosts for years, now he wanted the truth. He started digging into public records, insurance reports, and phone logs from that night. That's when the first lie appeared. The insurance payout had gone to a name he'd never heard before. Matthew Cole. A man who moved to Texas 1 month after the fire. A man with Mark Johnson's birthday. A man with the same scar on his left wrist. He didn't tell his mother what he'd found, not yet. Cynthia had suffered enough. But the truth didn't care about mercy. When he finally confronted her, she looked at him with tears that spoke louder than words. She had known. All this time. Mark had planned everything. The fire wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to erase. He wanted to start over. To punish Cynthia, to make her feel his pain. And for 15 years, he watched from afar. Marcus discovered surveillance photos, recent ones, showing an older man who looked just like his father attending small-town church services in Dallas. He booked a flight. He was going to find him. Texas was quiet. Too quiet. But in a small diner outside Fort Worth, Marcus found him sitting in the corner booth, reading a newspaper, older, grayer, but unmistakably his father. The moment their eyes met, time stopped. Mark didn't run. He simply said, "You shouldn't have come." But Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everything he'd buried for 15 years came rushing back. Anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Sometimes, we search for closure. Other times, closure finds us in the faces of people we thought were gone. Marcus sat down across from his father, and for the first time in his life, he realized. The fire never truly ended. It just changed shape. Years before the fire, before the smoke and the silence, Mark Johnson had stopped his car on a lonely road one stormy night. A man stood in the rain, drenched, shivering, lost. Mark offered him a ride, a meal, and a folded bill. The man thanked him and disappeared into the night. It should have ended there. But fate doesn't always stop where kindness begins. That night, when Mark mentioned the stranger to his wife, Cynthia, something changed. Her hands froze midair. Her face drained of color. And her voice trembled when she asked, what did he look like? Because she knew him. Before Mark. Before their family. Before everything. The man Mark had helped that night was David Turner, his wife's college sweetheart. Cynthia told her husband she didn't know the man. But her eyes told another story, one that Mark could neither read nor forget. That was the night the silence between them began. And like a slow leak in a roof, it started small, until everything beneath it rotted. Mark tried to forgive what he didn't understand. He smiled for the children, went to work, came home, and pretended the world was steady. But the mind remembers what the heart wants to forget. Late at night, he sat in his car for hours before entering his home, staring at the porch light, trying to decide if warmth was still waiting behind that door. One evening, he was seen in the backyard burning something: old letters, photographs, documents. He said he was cleaning, but his eyes said he was erasing. A few weeks later, he found a letter hidden in Cynthia's drawer. It was from the man in the rain. A letter written years ago, full of regret, apology, and unfinished love. Mark never said what he felt that night. But from then on, his silence carried the weight of every word he couldn't bear to ask. The home that once rang with laughter began to echo with absence. Their son, Marcus, watched the distance grow. Their daughter, Tiana, learned to whisper her joy. The quiet had become a weapon. 15 years later, Mark reappeared. Alive. Carrying the weight of years in silence. He claimed he'd been living under another name, too ashamed to return. But when Marcus asked him if the fire had truly been an accident, Mark didn't answer. He only looked away, and in his silence, the truth was buried again. When Marcus told Cynthia that Mark was alive, she didn't faint. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I know." Because she'd known for years. She had forgiven him quietly, visited him secretly, and loved him still even when she said she didn't. For years, everyone thought Cynthia was the betrayed. But love isn't always about innocence. Sometimes, it's about the sins two people choose to forgive, and the truths they choose to bury. Marcus never found peace in their reconciliation. He saw their love not as healing, but as betrayal disguised as forgiveness. The boy who watched his home burn grew into a man afraid of warmth. He carried his father's silence, his mother's sorrow, and the fire they both left behind. He swore he could still smell the smoke, not from the house, but from the love that burned it. Because sometimes, love doesn't die in the fire. It becomes it. Years later, Marcus started a podcast. A small show where he told stories about family and forgiveness. Episode 10 was the one that broke the internet. He called it The Fire That Never Went Out. He ended it with these words. My father wasn't just a man. He was a storm. My mother wasn't evil. She was lost. And me. I was the fire that kept trying to burn quietly. If you're listening, remember this. Secrets don't stay buried. They smolder, waiting for oxygen. And when the right moment comes, they burn everything you've built. So before your home catches fire, speak. Forgive and heal. In the end, it wasn't love that failed them. It was pride that built the distance. And silence that kept it standing. Mark and Cynthia's story reminds us. Sometimes, forgiveness comes too late. And sometimes, the ones we love the most are the ones we lose in the quiet.